Hello, welcome to the National Resource Center, Mass Communication and Journalism Department of Tezpur University. I am Professor Sisir Basu from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. In my last lecture, we talked about the basics of development communication, how development communication began and what were the main tenets of development communication. We discussed the historical background, we discussed about some of the contribution made by some of the scholars, books we discussed like Daniel Lerner's Passing of the Traditional Society. We also discussed about Wilbur Schramm's contribution, mass media and development communication. We also discussed about three major definitions, one by Nora Cabral, the other one was by Everett Roger, and the third one was by Rosario Braid, and we discussed, described, explained those three definitions. Now, in this lecture today, or in this discussion that we are having, we are going to critically appraise development communication. What went right? Maybe there is very little of it, but what went wrong, we are going to point out to that. First and foremost, the criticism that has come about was by Rohan Samarajiva in his article, The Murky Beginning of Communication and Development Field, Voice of America and the Passing of Traditional Society. He is a Sri Lankan scholar. He has done a lot of work in the area of development and he is still active. This article he wrote long time back, but it pointed out about some of the information that were suppressed when Daniel Lerner's book, The Passing of the Traditional Society, was released and was presented and was praised. These things were not given to the general public, and the scholars were not knowing exactly what goaded, what influenced Daniel Lerner to come up with that book. And that is why when Rohan Samarajiva looked into the whole history of it, he said that there was something wrong, murky beginning, that is how he talks about, and he went on digging further and found that development communication was a propaganda project for the USA during the Cold War period. So, it was a kind of a soft weapon, that is what Daniel Lerner says. He also stated that Daniel Lerner's project was funded by government agencies of the USA, particularly by the Voice of America. Now, during 1970s or mid-70s, it was found that development communication was not yielding the expected results. Like the way you have Nora Cabral saying that there should be a transformation, that transformation did not occur. It was also said that a large number of people, poor people, will be lifted up from the poverty to some sort of a respectable life. That also was not forthcoming. Then we know that it was a kind of an instrument of management, which Rosario Braid said, that was also not there, and Everett Rogers creating of an environment, there wasn't there, because people were not seeing the results, people were not feeling that there was development that was happening. So, when the criticism came about, when people started doubting development communication, the votaries, or those who propagated the development communication should be owned up, should be applied in the area of development in the third world countries. The votaries and advocates, they regrouped and then they deliberated upon as to why this was not working the way it should have, and after a lot of deliberations, they came up with a concept called development support communication. Development communication was previously there, now they are saying that it is development support communication. That means the participation was the key aspect of development communication. The beneficiaries should come forth, and whenever there is a project, they should participate in that. That is what they meant. And also they pointed out that development communication is not a panacea. That means it is not going to give results just like that because it is communicated. People will have to work, and the working should be at different level. But the main concept that came up in development support communication was that the beneficiaries should participate. However, development communication even after that did not yield the positive results, and also there was no positive transformation in various countries, whether it is in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia or Asian continent. A lot of hype was there, but the ground reality was very discouraging. In India, development communication was taken up with a lot of expectation that development communication will deliver the goods. There will be a lot of people who will be lifted up from the poverty to a respectable life. Most of the DC program, that is development communication programs in India, was done in local language. That was something that was great because it was not done in English and it was not done in other prominent languages. In many cases, the language of the local people were used, and these languages helped people to understand the messages of development communication. There were various serials that were done, different programs were aired, like television serial Hum Log was based on many developmental issues, and people were hooked up with it. People organized themselves, they sat in front of television set and watched these programs, serials, where many of their problems were talked about, discussed, and many times solutions were suggested. Apart from broad development messages, specific messages about development were also aired or telecast. Some of these areas are family planning. So, people were told as to how to control their family, the number of the members in their family. Then there were many discussions and programs about health. Tips were given about health. People talked about the advantage of literacy. In fact, there were many literacy programs that were propagated, that were talked about, so that ordinary people would join by getting motivated in this program. So, programs on family planning, health, literacy were aired. Also about agriculture, like high yielding variety of seed, how to test soils, how to irrigate their plot of land and cultivate more and get 2 or 3 times more harvest. Then there were also educational broadcast. These were spread through radio and television. Now, for agriculture, regular programs like Krishi Darshan, that was in Doordarshan, Krishi Katha, Krishi Vani were being telecast and broadcast. Now, one has to understand that it was not easy for people to sit in front of television and watch, because television sets were not evenly distributed, and those who were poor couldn't afford to have a television set. So, there were many community television sets, community radio sets, and people used to gather together in front of television and watch many programs. They were motivated, they were educated, and they were informed about various aspects of agriculture. Then education was something that India always wanted to link the media with. Say for instance, our television started in 1959 in the month of September, and the purpose of that was to have educational program like school level mathematics and social sciences, science programs were aired during that time. Now, some of the schools and school children and high school children in and around Delhi benefited from the telecast at that time, but the rest of the country did not have that benefit. So, it was 1971 when television was accepted, and major chunk of the time was given to educational telecast. Later on you will know that SITE program was one of the major experiment that India conducted in its soil and through television about education. Now, after that UGC also came up around 1984. It started a program called Countrywide Classroom. The purpose was to help the students as well as the ordinary people to learn a little more through television, and students, those who could not afford tuition or books or some other resource material to learn, they could tune into television and watch Countrywide Classroom telecast. So, in 1984 that was a big leap, and then IGNO, when it started in 1986, immediately it had to supplement the print medium course material with IGNO telecast, which would be aired in the morning around 5 o'clock and also would be repeated in the evening. Then Gyanvani came up. It was also an educational program, and then Gyan Darshan was another program that were regularly aired and telecast for the benefit of various target groups. Now, some of these programs were for formal education, but many of these programs the other people, ordinary people could watch and learn from. So, that was the benefit. It cut both ways. That means the people who were enrolled in courses in formal colleges and universities could take the benefit of this, could take advantage of these programs. Also, the ordinary people could learn, may not be fully, but some of the points, some of the teaching points, some of the information that would be given in this program, they would be able to gather and learn and increase their knowledge. Now, seeing the expectation of the people among the world, Wilbur Sham said that development communication was really a magic wand. That means it would work like a magic bullet, or something that you expect and you wish for and you get it, like we talk about in the fairy tales about magic wand. So, Wilbur Sham was quick enough to recognize the power of the communication through media, particularly of education, and he said that development communication was a magic wand. Now, let us talk about some of the issues that we are facing nowadays. They are related to development, but let us see what we make out of it. In Human Development Index, since development communication has been with us for about 40-50 years, let us look into the development index of India. We rank 131, that is 131 out of 180 countries. Not something that we should be proud of, that we almost we are at the bottom. Human index means literacy level, health, education, infrastructural facilities, food security. These are the human index, and put together we do not do well. We are at 131 rank, which is rather poor. Then India has the largest number of illiterate people, 287 million. That is 37%, more than one third, 37% of the world's illiterate population live in India. Now, that is an indication, that is a parameter of development, and we haven't done it. Like we are independent for the last 70 years or so, and we could not solve our illiteracy problem. Literacy is a tool with which people can empower themselves, and when you are illiterate, many things, many messages you won't be able to take advantage of, and we have 37% of the world illiterate population in our country. Now, India has half of its population landless, 442 million people, more than 100 households, that means families, they do not have even 1 inch of land. So, in their own country they are landless. Now, that also does not speak well about us, because we need to make everybody belonging to this land, and if 442 million, that is 1/3, more than 1/3 of our population do not have access to even 1 inch of land. So, these are the parameters of development. Then if we look into education, only 12.1% of the total youth population who could go to higher education are in university. So, out of 100, only 12 young persons are in higher education. What is happening to 88 people, 88 youth? They are not having access to higher education. Of course, distance education nowadays is helping out. With the inclusion of distance education, we have about 20% of the youth. That means still 80% of our youth are out of the purview of higher education. That also does not speak well about our country. Now, we know that 1% of the total population in India is cornering about 73% of the wealth of the nation. So, the disparity is huge, and you have marginalization at a large scale in India. So, our society needs to do something in order to see the equity and equality prevail in our society. Now, we talk in a big way about the green revolution that has taken place in Punjab in 60s and 70s. They helped us to overcome or to have food security. That means we do not have to import any food. Punjab's contribution was great because of green revolution. But if we see now, because of the kind of seeds that we used, and we negated the local crops that were cultivated before green revolution, we will find that because of the heavy use of different fertilizers and water, irrigation water, two things have happened. The soil has become now uncultivable. That means they are unfit for cultivation, and another thing has happened because of the heavy use of fertilizers is that the water has become poisonous. So, Punjab is in dire trouble now because of green revolution. It cannot grow its indigenous crop because the soil will not support, and the water has become poisonous. Any kind of crop cannot be grown there. So, that is also something that we need to keep in mind when we are considering development communication. Do we know that as a result of green revolution, which was a part of development communication project, Punjab has lost out its soil and lost its water resources. Now, if we see education, whatever education we have seen that, and this is not only in Indian research studies. I think United Nations also has pointed out that 90% of our graduates are not employable. It does not mean that they are not getting employment, but the areas for which they have been trained, they are not getting jobs in those areas. That means they are not adequately trained, or they are ill trained, and therefore, what is happening is that there is a wastage of resources in higher education. We need to see what is required in the field, and accordingly we must design our curriculum so that whoever passes out from our institutions would be employable. So, that is not a good sign that when we say that 90% of our graduates are not employable. Then another thing, there was a lot of fanfare, there was a lot of talk about big dams that we have them coming up in 60s and 70s. What we find now, these dams are drying up, that is, there is not enough water. Then our rivers are silting, causing havoc during rainy season, because the river bed is rising, and when there is enough of water coming down during monsoon season, they cannot be contained in the river, because the area of containment has shrunk dramatically because of the siltation, and they spill over to the villages and crop fields, and they cause havoc in the country. And this is happening almost regularly every year during the monsoon period. Now, while we are talking about development communication and some of the criticism of it and the failure of it, we also need to appraise the, you need to evaluate many other projects that came up simultaneously. Like many institutions in the Western countries were established, they were supposed to help the poorer countries and other countries that were on the path of development. Say for instance, Bretton Woods institution like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Now, they were established just in 1944 or 1945, just before the World War ended. And we need to evaluate as to what has been their contribution to the development projects in the third world countries, in the poorer countries. Did they deliver the goods? If not, then what they have done so far. Then we need to also organize ourselves and look into the roles, various committees and organizations that planned development communication. Say for instance, there was and there is still an organization called NATO. Why did it come into being? The Marshall Plan that was designed for Germany and Japan. And there was another organization that is called CENTO, that means Central Treaty Organization. Central Treaty Organization was a somewhat a cluster of countries, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey and UK. If you see in the map, they form a kind of a wall to stop the influence of USSR and its allied countries to go to the Middle East and down under into Africa. So, CENTO had a political purpose, though many times it is said that CENTO was for purpose of development, but in reality if we check, if we go into the history and if we see and evaluate their working, we will see that they had some other purposes and the achievement in the area of development was almost not there. One needs to review the intention of various projects, policies and activities and the outcome of these committees, institutions, and see to it that how they came into being actually. And I am sure if we look into deeply about their existence and their operation, we will see that they were linked with USA and USA's project called development communication. We need to question also the things that have happened in the past, and we need to evaluate this institution dispassionately. This is for the case of knowledge, this is for the case of understanding, and this is for the case of knowing truth, that we need to evaluate development communication fully and completely. So, these are some of the aspects that I have spoken to you about the critical or the negative side because development communication did not deliver the promises that it made. We have seen that even in our own country, I have discussed many of these issues like health, literacy, and agriculture, and we have seen that failure is looking at us in this area. We still have to put our health in order, agriculture in order, and these are the basic parameters for development. And so when we look into development communication, when we look into the projects, we need to be quite dispassionate and see how they are delivering and what they are delivering, and at the end of the day, have they delivered whatever they have promised. So I am sure you would look into many of the projects that we have had in the past and we are having now, and with a little caution look into them dispassionately and find out the results. That will be a true learning for you. Thank you very much for being with us. I am sure you will continue to dig in and get knowledge for yourself. Thank you.